My name is Lila, and we were the Harringtons, at least in the way my parents wanted the world to see us. Perfect, polished, and untouchable. That morning, I had woken up thinking it would be another ordinary day in our quiet Oregon town, filled with the usual mundane routine. The clatter of breakfast dishes, my mother's soft hum while she made tea, the distant roar of the neighbor's lawnmower, and Evelyn, my older sister, flaunting her effortless charm as if she owned every room she entered. I never imagined that the day would turn into a nightmare before it had even begun. The first knock on the door was sharp, almost too loud, echoing unnaturally in our small hallway. A second followed, and then a third, deliberate and heavy, like the sound of judgment itself. I opened the door to find 2 police officers standing there, eyes professional, expressions unreadable. They called my name, and the next thing I knew, they were walking straight into my bedroom as though the house belonged to them. My heart thumped violently against my ribcage, a chaotic drumbeat that seemed to echo in my ears, and my body froze. I had never felt so small, so exposed. They pulled from my drawer a bag of pills, opiates, I later learned, that I had never seen before in my life. My mother's finger pointed sharply in my direction. My father gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, and Evelyn, leaning against the railing like a queen surveying her kingdom, had a small, triumphant smile at the corner of her lips. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for this moment, the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew they would never be blamed. And in that instant, I understood with a gut-deep certainty that I had been set up. The room seemed to shrink around me, the air heavy and impossible to inhale, each breath a battle. Panic, anger, confusion, they all collided inside me like a storm I could neither escape nor control. My mind raced for answers, for a way out, for any sliver of logic that could explain why the people I trusted most had betrayed me. But there was none. The betrayal was complete, surgical, deliberate. And yet, amidst the fear, a spark of defiance ignited. I still had one card left, one move that could change everything if I dared to play it. I realized then, with a clarity sharpened by shock and adrenaline, that this was not just an attack on my freedom but on my identity, my very existence within this family. They wanted to erase me, to rewrite the story of who I was, and they believed they could do it without consequence. But they hadn't counted on me, the quiet, overlooked, invisible me who had spent years watching, learning, observing every nuance, every small slip, every unguarded moment of arrogance from Evelyn. I had been invisible for a long time, but invisibility is not the same as powerlessness. I had grown up in the shadows, yes, but shadows, as Grandpa Henry had once told me, have their value. They show you where the light is, and if you learn carefully, you can navigate, even manipulate what others cannot see. And so, standing there in my own room, the very place that should have been my sanctuary, surrounded by the people who should have protected me, I made a silent promise. I would not be erased. I would not crumble. I would find the truth, and I would turn the tables. That morning, everything I thought I knew about home, about family, about love and loyalty, shattered like fragile glass under the weight of betrayal. But amidst the shards, I found clarity. This was not the end. This was the beginning. From as early as I could remember, I understood that I would never be the center of attention in the Harrington household. Evelyn had a glow that drew eyes wherever she went, an effortless charm that seemed natural, as if she were born to shine. Family photos were her stage, and I was always the shadow beside her, clutching some forgotten toy or holding a book no one would notice. Her voice was clear and confident, a sound that carried across rooms and lingered in the minds of listeners, while mine often vanished into silence. I recall one crisp autumn fair when a stranger approached just to take a picture with Evelyn because she looked like a child model, and I stood beside her, ignored, holding a stuffed toy with droopy eyes. My own achievements, if acknowledged at all, were tucked away, shoved into dusty drawers as though they were nothing more than clutter. The year I won first place in the state art competition, my 3-week-long effort was placed into a kitchen cabinet, wedged between old bills and expired coupons. Evelyn's lopsided clay vase, made in her art class just a week later, was displayed prominently on the living room table under a lamp's warm glow, as if it were a priceless heirloom. My father bragged to guests, "My daughter has a natural gift for art," and I stood there, hands still smelling of paint, wondering how much more I would have to do before I was seen. Every family argument followed the same script. Without intervention, Evelyn was always right, and if we clashed, my mother would say, "Lila, stay quiet for the sake of peace." That phrase wasn't advice. It was a command that allowed Evelyn to act without consequence while I learned to swallow my voice, my opinions, my needs. The only person who truly understood me was my grandfather, Henry, who lived alone on the outskirts of town in a weathered yellow wooden house with a wide porch and a swing that creaked with the wind. His home smelled of toasted bread and aged pine, a mix of comfort and warmth that made it feel like another world. Whenever I felt suffocated at home, I would find any excuse to walk my dog, Buddy, over there. Buddy had come into my life when I was 11, initially intended as Evelyn's project. She had drafted a 4-page care plan and even written a responsibility pledge to convince our parents to get him, but after 3 weeks, Evelyn complained he was noisy, smelly, and scratched the floors. I overheard my parents debating whether to take him to a shelter or worse. I stepped forward and said, "I'll take care of him. Everything he needs will be my responsibility." They hesitated, not because they trusted me, but because they didn't want to deal with him. From that moment, Buddy became my anchor. He slept at the foot of my bed, followed me everywhere, and watched me as though I were the center of his world. Grandpa Henry adored him too, and whenever I visited, he would smile, make tea, and pull out a bag of dog treats without asking a single question. Sometimes we'd sit silently on the porch, watching the sunset, and in those moments, I felt seen and heard in a way I never did at home. Grandpa once told me, "Shadows have their value, Lila. They show you where the light is, and sometimes you must create your own." Those words became a lifeline, reminding me that even in the shadows, I had power. And though my parents and Evelyn could ignore me, ridicule me, and push me aside, I had Buddy and Grandpa Henry, proof that I was not invisible, proof that I had worth, proof that I could endure. Yet even with these anchors, I could not escape the awareness that my family had left me behind, that every frown, every quick nod to Evelyn, every time I was overlooked, sliced away at my sense of belonging. It was a September afternoon when Evelyn returned from college, just as the maple leaves outside our windows had turned a deep, blazing red. There was no warning, no call, no note. She simply appeared at the front door, striding in with the ease of someone who believed she belonged everywhere. Her oversized sunglasses hid half her face, concealing expressions I had spent years learning to read. My mother's voice came from the kitchen, calm but not surprised. "Back already?" she said, as if Evelyn's comings and goings were routine, expected, and entirely under her control. My father remained silent, leaning against the counter, but I noticed the faint curl of a smile at the corner of his mouth as Evelyn removed her glasses and gave that polished grin I had known all my life. She explained that the college environment had been too toxic, that it wasn't right for her, and that she needed time off to find herself. Her words were neat, polished, almost noble, but the unease in her eyes betrayed something deeper, something I could not yet name. In the following weeks, Evelyn was mostly absent from family life, sleeping through the day and keeping her bedroom door closed at night. The sound of heavy electronic beats and bursts of laughter from friends would leak through the cracks under her door, making me shiver whenever I passed by. Sometimes, near midnight, I would sneak to the kitchen for water and find a stranger sitting at the table, rolling a cigarette with a calm indifference that made me feel invisible, as if I were nothing more than furniture in the house. Evelyn would appear suddenly, her eyes sharp, and tell me to go to my room in a tone that was calm but carried an unspoken command. Over time, I began noticing small, subtle signs, her lingering in the hallway just outside my door, pretending to adjust a picture on the wall, her gaze fixed on my desk drawer as if calculating, measuring, planning. Once, after stepping out of the bathroom with my hair still damp, I caught her leaning against the wall across from my room, eyes locked on the left drawer where I kept some of my most treasured items. She didn't smile when our eyes met. "Why are you locking your door?" "It's our house, you know," she said casually, but her eyes flickered with something sharp, cautious, a silent warning. I didn't ask questions. Over the years, I had learned that inquiries about Evelyn were quickly shut down by my mother. "You're always so suspicious. Learn to trust people." My father was gentler, but his words were the same. Don't get involved in things that aren't yours to handle. And so I began observing. Every movement, every glance, every sound became a piece of the puzzle, each tiny detail another clue in the silent story unfolding around me. Grandpa Henry noticed I was visiting less, and one day he asked, "Something going on at home, Lila?" I smiled and shook my head, reassuring him, but he studied me carefully before adding, "If you see someone touch something that doesn't belong to them, don't pretend you didn't notice. Pretending only makes them think you agree." I understood then that he wasn't speaking only about possessions. He meant boundaries, respect, and integrity, things Evelyn had never learned. The house itself felt different with her back. It wasn't louder from music or chatter, but from a quiet tension that filled every gap in conversation, every pause at the dinner table, every glance shared between my parents. They avoided mentioning her dropping out, treating her like a special guest returning from a long, leisurely trip, while I was left to fade into the background, familiar but invisible. And yet, deep down, I sensed that the real storm was approaching, a moment when all the subtle manipulations, the quiet observations, the careful notes I had kept would collide in ways I couldn't yet predict. It was like smelling smoke under a closed door. You knew a fire was coming even before you saw the flames. And this time, I knew I had to be ready, or everything I had built for myself, everything that kept me grounded, would burn away. The morning of my arrest began like any other. I remember the way the sunlight slanted through my curtains, casting long pale lines across the wooden floor, the smell of coffee drifting faintly from the kitchen, and the quiet hum of a lawnmower from somewhere down the street. There was nothing in the air to suggest that my life was about to shatter. I had just zipped my school bag and was heading downstairs when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the door, heavy and deliberate. My mother answered, her voice unusually bright, almost rehearsed. "Officers, please come in." The sight of them standing in our living room, a man and a woman in dark uniforms, their badges gleaming under the light, made my heart skip. They asked for me by name. My father called up the stairs with a tone I couldn't quite read. I descended slowly, confusion prickling my skin, as if my body already knew something my mind could not accept. The female officer held out a small, clear bag of pills, sealed tightly, and said, "These were found in your drawer. Can you explain this, Miss Harrington?" My mouth went dry. The world blurred. For a moment, I thought it must be a mistake, a sick misunderstanding. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Then I saw Evelyn at the top of the staircase, leaning against the railing, her arms crossed, lips curled in the faintest smile, smug, satisfied, certain. My mother's eyes avoided mine, darting between the officers and the floor. My father cleared his throat and muttered something about never expecting this from her. I felt the ground shift beneath me. It was as though I had been shoved off a cliff but left hanging in midair, waiting for the fall. "That's not mine," I managed to say, my voice trembling. But the words sounded weak, hollow even to my own ears. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, like a cat watching a bird struggle, and in that moment, I knew with piercing clarity that she had planted them. Every suspicion I had carried, every glance, every subtle warning, all of it came crashing together. The officers didn't care. Protocol guided them, not truth. They handcuffed me, the cold metal biting into my wrists, and read me my rights as if reciting a memorized poem. My mother gasped faintly but didn't protest. My father's silence was heavier than any words could have been. Evelyn's expression never wavered. As they led me out the door, the neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers spreading like wildfire. My chest burned with humiliation, fear, and a grief so sharp it nearly doubled me over. This wasn't just about pills. This was about betrayal, about being abandoned by the very people who were supposed to fight for me. The walk to the police car felt endless, each step echoing with the sound of my childhood unraveling. When the door slammed shut behind me, separating me from the only home I had ever known, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and whispered to myself, "This isn't the end." It can't be, because even then, in the midst of shock and devastation, I clung to one fragile truth. I still had the ability to fight back, to reveal the lies, and to reclaim the life that Evelyn was so determined to steal. The police station smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee, The kind of place where time felt frozen, where hours bled together without meaning. They led me through a maze of hallways until we stopped at a small interrogation room. Gray walls, a metal table, 2 chairs, a single buzzing light overhead that cast unforgiving shadows across my face. I sat down, my wrists still sore from the handcuffs, my body stiff with a mixture of fear and defiance. The male officer placed a folder on the table, thick with papers that rustled like a judgment waiting to fall. He asked me questions in a steady, monotone voice. Where did you get the pills? Who supplied them? How long have you been using? Each word was a hammer, trying to break me open. My answers came out shaky but firm. They're not mine. I've never seen them before. Someone put them there. The female officer leaned in closer, her gaze sharp, skeptical. You expect us to believe that? She said, her voice laced with doubt. My throat tightened, but inside me, anger began to stir. For years, I had swallowed my pain, my invisibility in that house. 4 years, Evelyn had been the shining star, and I had been the shadow. And now, here I was, accused, cornered, framed, and no one in my family had lifted a finger to defend me. The realization cut deeper than the accusation itself. My parents had always chosen Evelyn. They had believed her smiles, her perfect grades, her golden image. And now, even in this critical moment, they stood silently complicit, letting me drown so she could stay afloat. My eyes burned, but I didn't let the tears fall. I'm telling you the truth, I whispered, my voice trembling with both desperation and conviction. The officers exchanged a glance, one that told me they had already decided what box to put me in. Still, they kept pressing, their questions looping, circling like vultures. Hours passed. I couldn't tell how many, until my body slumped forward, exhausted from repeating myself, from trying to convince people who never wanted to believe me in the first place. Finally, they pushed a paper toward me, something about signing a statement. I stared at it, my vision blurring, the words dancing like smoke. My hand hovered over the pen, but I pulled it back. No, I said firmly. The word surprised even me. It rang out sharp and defiant in the sterile room. They didn't like it, but for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a flicker of control return to me. I might have been accused. I might have been betrayed, but I wasn't going to hand them the victory of my silence. Deep inside, beneath the fear, beneath the humiliation, a new thought began to take shape. If no one else was going to fight for me, then I would have to fight for myself. That decision, born in the suffocating air of that interrogation room, was the spark that would change everything. The holding cell was colder than I expected, not just in temperature but in spirit. The walls were painted a dull beige, chipped in places, and the air carried a damp heaviness that made me shiver. They took my shoelaces, my jewelry, and handed me a thin blanket that did little to keep the chill away. I sat on the narrow bench pressed against the wall, hugging my knees, trying to steady the storm inside me. From down the corridor, muffled voices echoed, other detainees, some laughing bitterly, some shouting curses. I felt like I had been dropped into a world I didn't belong to, and yet this was where I was expected to stay, branded as guilty before anyone had listened to my truth. Hours slipped by like dripping water, slow and torturous. Every sound felt amplified, the clang of metal doors, the shuffle of footsteps, the distant ringing of a phone. I kept glancing at the tiny barred window high above me, wondering if anyone outside even remembered I existed. When visiting hours finally came, my heart raced with hope. Maybe my parents would come, maybe they'd believe me, maybe they'd at least look me in the eyes and ask for the truth. But when the guard called my name and led me to the visitor's booth, only silence greeted me on the other side of the glass. No mother, no father, no brother, no familiar face, just an empty chair. The hollowness that settled in me then was heavier than any chain. I pressed my hand against the glass anyway, leaving a faint print, as though clinging to the idea that someone should have been there. Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I forced them down. Crying would not change their absence, and it would not break the walls that Evelyn had built around me with her lies. I replayed every memory of her smirks, her stage concern, the way she stood at the top of the stairs when I was handcuffed. The realization grew sharper. This wasn't only her cruelty, it was their choice too. My parents had chosen her silence over my screams, her image over my life. That betrayal was more suffocating than the bars themselves. Yet in that emptiness, something hardened inside me. I stopped waiting for them. I stopped imagining their voices rushing in to defend me. Instead, I sat back, closed my eyes, and began to think about what I would do when I got out. How I would prove the truth, how I would expose the mask Evelyn wore so perfectly. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine a version of me that wasn't the forgotten daughter or the scapegoat. The loneliness was unbearable, but it became a forge, shaping me into someone I hadn't known I could be. Someone who could survive without their approval. Someone who could fight without their help. By the time the guard came to escort me back, I wasn't the same girl who had walked in. The cell was still cold, the walls still suffocating, but inside me, a quiet fire had begun to burn. The courtroom was nothing like what I had imagined from movies or television. It wasn't dramatic or glamorous. It was sterile, heavy, and suffocating with unspoken judgments. The wooden benches creaked as people shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting toward me as though I were some dangerous animal dragged out for display. My wrists were free this time, but the invisible weight of chains still clung to me. The prosecutor's voice droned on, clinical and sharp, painting me as reckless, irresponsible, a threat to myself and those around me. Each word landed like a nail hammered deeper into my coffin. I tried to sit tall, to keep my breathing steady, but the truth was, I wanted to shrink into nothingness. When my eyes wandered across the room, they found Evelyn. She sat perfectly poised beside my parents, her hair neatly pulled back, her face the portrait of heartbreak. Her hand clutched Mom's as though she needed comfort, her head bowed just enough to look delicate, vulnerable. And my parents ate it up. My father rubbed her back soothingly. My mother kissed her temple, while I, the accused, the black sheep, the shame, sat alone across the room, as though I were already guilty. Evelyn raised her eyes then, and for just a flicker of a second, she looked at me. Not with pity, not with fear, but with triumph. A small, cruel smile tugged at the corner of her lips before she quickly dropped her gaze again, playing the innocent sister devastated by her sibling's downfall. My stomach turned. The judge called my name, asked if I had anything to say in my defense. My lawyer, a court-appointed stranger, nudged me gently, urging me to speak. My throat tightened, words struggling to come out, but I forced them anyway. "They're not mine," I said, my voice cracking but clear. I was framed. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. The prosecutor smirked, ready to dismantle my claim as delusion. My parents didn't even flinch. They didn't stand up, didn't protest, didn't demand the court listen to me. They sat stone-faced, anchored to Evelyn's fragile performance. In that moment, it hit me that my fight wasn't only against the law, it was against my own blood. Against the people who were supposed to love me most. The hearing dragged on, details recited, papers shuffled, decisions delayed. By the time the gavel finally struck, declaring that the trial would proceed, I was numb. As the bailiff escorted me out, I glanced once more toward my family. Evelyn's tears glistened like diamonds, her face pressed into Mom's shoulder. To everyone watching, she was the perfect daughter standing by her family in a time of crisis. And me, I was the crisis. I realized then that Evelyn didn't just want me gone. She wanted me erased, rewritten into the villain of her story, so she could shine brighter. The thought burned through me as I walked back into the shadows of custody. The world saw her mask. Only I saw the monster behind it. Back in the cell after court, I sat with my back pressed against the cold wall, staring at the faint cracks running like veins across the ceiling. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene. Evelyn's trembling hands, her perfectly timed tears, the way my parents wrapped themselves around her as though she were a fragile bird who needed protecting. That image replayed again and again until something inside me snapped. I had spent my whole life begging for their approval, begging to be seen, to be loved, to be chosen. And now I realized that nothing I could do would ever make me enough. They had already written me off, handed my identity to Evelyn like a cheap trade. For a while, despair consumed me. I thought maybe I should just let it end, let the system swallow me whole and disappear into the shadows of forgotten people. But somewhere between the silence and the suffocating loneliness, another thought whispered its way into my mind. What if I stopped being the forgotten? What if I stopped being their victim? What if I took control of the story Evelyn had been writing for me? The idea terrified me at first because it was unfamiliar, fighting not just to survive, but to strike back. Yet the more I thought about her smirk, about the way she looked at me in that courtroom, the more the fear turned into something sharper, something alive. I started to notice details I hadn't before. The guards who chatted too loudly outside the cell, the other inmates who traded favors for cigarettes, the way lawyers and staff exchanged information in whispers. This place wasn't just punishment, it was a map, a network, a place where survival depended on strategy. And if I could survive here, I could survive anywhere. I stopped crying at night. I stopped waiting for the sound of footsteps that never came. Instead, I began memorizing patterns, paying attention to how people moved, how they spoke, how they lied. I realized Evelyn wasn't unique. There were plenty of Evelyns in the world. But she had made the mistake of underestimating me. She thought the bars would break me, but they were shaping me. I started sketching ideas in my head, imagining what it would look like when I finally walked free. I didn't know how yet, or when, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. When that day came, I wouldn't be the same broken sister she framed. I would be the storm she never saw coming. I whispered the words to myself in the dark, a vow only I could hear. I will not be erased. I will not be your scapegoat. I will make you choke on your lies. And with every whisper, the fire inside me grew. It was in the 3rd week of my stay that I met her, Marisol. She was older than me by at least 15 years, her face carved with lines of hardship, her eyes sharp like broken glass. She carried herself with the kind of authority that made even the guards tread carefully around her. Most of the inmates avoided her, whispering about her past, about the things she had done on the outside that landed her here. But me? I didn't care about the rumors. What caught my attention was the way she studied people, the same way I had begun to. She caught me staring one afternoon in the mess hall, and instead of brushing it off, she smirked, slid her tray across from mine, and sat down. "You don't belong here," she said flatly, her accent heavy, her voice low. I stiffened, unsure if it was an insult or an observation. "Neither do you," I muttered back. That made her laugh, a harsh, unexpected sound that cut through the clamor of the cafeteria. "Maybe not, but I know how to survive here, and I can see you're trying to figure it out." There was something unsettling about how easily she read me, as if she had been inside my head, listening to my whispered vows in the dark. Over the next few days, Marisol started showing up more often, sitting near me during meal times, walking with me in the yard, correcting the way I carried myself. "Stop looking scared," she hissed under her breath. "Fear is blood in the water. Hide it." She taught me how to notice power dynamics among the inmates, who owed who had control over smuggled items, who could be bought with favors. She explained how alliances were currency, how silence was more valuable than truth. And slowly, the fear that had been my constant companion began to shift into something sharper, awareness. Marisol never asked me why I was there, not at first. She didn't care about my innocence or guilt. But one evening, while we scrubbed trays in the kitchen, she finally asked, "So who set you up?" I froze, the question striking deeper than I expected. She saw it in my eyes before I even said the name. "Your sister," she guessed, and my silence confirmed it. Marisol shook her head, almost pitying me. "Family cuts deeper than enemies," she said, rinsing the soap from her hands. "But it also makes revenge sweeter." Those words stuck to me like glue. Revenge. She had said it aloud, the thing I had only whispered to myself. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Marisol wasn't just a mentor in survival. She was a mirror reflecting the darker version of me I was becoming. With her guidance, I began to plan more carefully, more deliberately. It wasn't enough to dream of payback. I needed to become someone capable of carrying it out. And under Marisol's watchful eye, that transformation had already begun. The first real test came one evening in the yard. A group of girls, 3 of them, all bulkier and louder than me, cornered me near the fence. They had been watching me for days, whispering among themselves, laughing when I walked past. I knew what was coming, but I also knew this was the moment Marisol had warned me about. The leader, a heavy-set woman with tattoos climbing her neck, shoved me hard against the fence. You think you're better than us, little princess, she sneered, her breath hot and foul against my face. My old self would have shrunk, would have begged, would have curled up and hoped the storm passed quickly. But not this time. I remembered Marisol's voice. Fear is blood in the water. So I swallowed my panic, met her gaze head-on, and forced my voice steady. Touch me again, and you'll regret it. They laughed, a cruel chorus that echoed across the yard. The leader shoved me again, harder this time, her hand grabbing the front of my shirt. My heart pounded, but instead of freezing, I acted. I slammed my knee into her stomach with all the strength I had. She doubled over, cursing, and for a split second, the other two hesitated. I didn't wait. I pushed past them, standing tall even though my hands were shaking. The guards saw the scuffle but didn't intervene. Fights like this were entertainment to them. When it was over, I walked back toward the benches where Marisol sat watching, arms crossed, a slow smile spreading across her face. Later that night, she pulled me aside. Not bad, she said. You're learning. I tried to brush it off, but inside I felt something shift. I had stood my ground. I had fought back. And more importantly, I had won. Not because I was stronger, but because I refused to be weak. The news spread fast. Whispers moved through the cell block. The quiet girl had fought back. The fragile one wasn't so fragile anymore. For the first time since I arrived, people looked at me differently. Not as prey, but as someone to think twice about before crossing. Lying in my bunk that night, I touched the bruise forming on my arm and realized it wasn't pain I felt. It was power. The same power Evelyn had stolen from me when she framed me. The same power my parents denied me when they turned their backs. Now it was mine again, and I would never let anyone take it away. That night, instead of whispering revenge into the darkness, I said it aloud, a vow carved into the silence. Evelyn, when I come for you, you won't see me as your sister. You'll see me as the reckoning you created. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was preparing. Every moment became a lesson, every interaction a rehearsal for the life that awaited me beyond these walls. I studied people, learned how to read their faces, their voices, their weaknesses. Marisol would quiz me during mealtimes. What does she fear? She'd whisper, nodding toward a nervous inmate across the hall. Or, what does he want? Pointing at a guard with tired eyes. At first, I stumbled, but soon the answers came naturally. Power wasn't just about fists or volume. It was about control, about knowing what drove people and bending it to your advantage. I began to imagine Evelyn not as my sister, not even as family, but as just another opponent to study, to dismantle piece by piece. I thought about her smirk when the verdict came down, the way she leaned into my parents as if she had always been the favored one. It wasn't just betrayal, it was arrogance. And arrogance could be weaponized. In my bunk at night, I mapped out scenarios. What if I confronted her directly? No, too reckless. What if I exposed her, gathered proof, turned the world she built for herself against her? Better. I pictured her face when the truth unraveled, the horror in her eyes when her lies came back like knives. The thought sustained me. The other inmates spent their nights dreaming of freedom in vague shapes, of beaches, of family, of silence. But I dreamt of justice sharpened into vengeance. Marisol noticed my obsession, but she didn't stop me. Instead, she fed it. Don't just plan how to hurt her, she advised one night. Plan how to erase her power. Make her nothing. The words clung to me, reshaping my vision. Revenge wasn't about pain. It was about stripping Evelyn of everything she had stolen from me, leaving her exposed and hollow. The countdown to my release became less about leaving prison and more about entering the battlefield. Every day I grew sharper, stronger, quieter. By the time the guards would call my name and swing open those iron gates, I wouldn't be the broken girl who had walked in months ago. I would be the storm waiting outside, patient but unstoppable. And Evelyn, my sister, my betrayer, would never see it coming. The day of my release arrived without ceremony. No speeches, no apologies, no redemption, just the clang of the final gate swinging open and the sun hitting my face like fire after years in the dark. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, the taste of air that wasn't tainted by concrete and steel. A guard shoved a small plastic bag into my hand, my belongings. A pair of jeans, a faded t-shirt, a wallet with barely any money inside. The remnants of the girl who walked in. But I wasn't her anymore. As I walked down the cracked sidewalk, I could feel the weight of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying, but none of it mattered. The world hadn't stopped spinning while I was gone, but for me, everything had narrowed down to one singular point. Evelyn. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Home had betrayed me the day my parents turned their backs, believing her lies over my truth. Instead, I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind where the wallpaper peeled and the lights buzzed overhead. It was perfect, quiet, anonymous. I laid out the contents of the plastic bag on the bed, stared at them, then pushed them aside. My real weapons weren't in that bag. They were inside me now. Patience, control, and the unshakable will to destroy the life Evelyn had built on my ashes. The first step wasn't confrontation. It was information. I needed to know who she had become in my absence. So I started small. A borrowed laptop from the motel clerk, a few hours digging through social media, public records, gossip threads. There she was, smiling, glowing, climbing her way up in the world as if nothing had ever happened. Evelyn had a new job, new friends, a life she flaunted online for the world to envy. My parents appeared in her pictures too, arms wrapped around her, pride painted on their faces. The sight should have broken me. Instead, it hardened me. Every smiling photo, every lie she curated for the world, was just fuel. I scribbled notes in a cheap notebook. Names, dates, connections. A web began to form, and at the center sat Evelyn, untouchable to the outside eye, but I knew better. She had weaknesses. Everyone did. And I would find them, one by one. That night, lying on the thin motel mattress, I whispered to myself, "This isn't the end of my sentence. This is the beginning of hers." And for the first time since the trial, I smiled. As the night deepened outside my motel window, I knew the road ahead would not be simple. Revenge wasn't a single act. It was a symphony, each note precise, each movement deliberate. I wasn't the broken girl who had been silenced in a courtroom. I wasn't the fragile prisoner who had cried herself to sleep. I was something new, something sharpened by fire and betrayal. Evelyn might have stolen my past, but my future was mine to shape, and I would carve it with her downfall. Tomorrow, the first piece of her world would begin to crack. And when the dust finally settled, the world would know she may have buried me once, but I had risen, stronger than she could ever imagine.